Welcome. Good morning to our December town hall. I am Rebecca Olson, I'm CEO of the Maryland Association of CPAs, and we are delighted to have you all here on this kind of frosty morning. We will start with our Conferences IO. I know I've already seen several of you in there doing the polls, but if you want to put your phone up to that QR code, or because this new fancy platform we have, I actually can chat you the link. So if you've wanted to participate in the polls before and had trouble finding it, I just chatted a link that you can click on. It will open in a separate tab for you where you can answer the polls. I have all of them open right now, but as we walk through them, they'll close and then open individually. So we will get started with our polls. The first question is, what are you looking forward to most in the new year? I can't believe we're talking about this already. It's December 13th. I swear yesterday was September 13th. But someone is most looking forward to a new tax season. So I don't know that a whole lot of people on here are agreeing with you, but we're glad that you love your job. That is fantastic. It's always good when we can enjoy and love our job, even on the hard days. Someone's marrying the love of their life. Congratulations. Somebody else is looking forward to tax season, relocating, retirement. Of course, we are all a little jealous of you. Family trip to Disney World, the beach after tax season. So keeping that kind of vacation in mind, getting through some of the longer days of tax season. Speaking on health and wellness more to accountants and others, thank you. Those are important topics. So thank you for sharing that stuff. Peace, downtime, a daughter's wedding, time with family, cruise, new beginnings. All of these things, somebody says it's end of 2023. It's been a tough year. Yes, for some, it's been a very tough year. I know even the holiday season, while lots of joy for some, is just a reminder of some of the toughness of the prior year. So we are glad you are here with us and willing to kind of start your morning with this positive focus. So I will click to the next poll, which is our demographic poll. It always gets so tiny on me, so I got to make it big. So hopefully we can see. Is that going to help it? Yes. And where do you work? Our retired folks are in the fastest, it looks like. 15, 16% of you. Thank you for staying involved and present in our profession. I think we're creating great legacy for the future of our profession by continuing to have you involved. Looks like, as typical of our membership, we're about maybe a little bit more on the public accounting side if we were to add up all those sole practitioners and those different sized public accounting firms. But a good 18% in private companies, 4% public companies, 8% government. And I think that's a 5%, testing my eyesight here, in nonprofit, 4% education. Still no students. We got to get some students on these. Maybe they're wrapping up end of quarter things. We'll go to the next slide and see your position or your level in your work. Retired folks are in there early again. As typical, we see on these town halls, pretty high level group of folks between sole practitioners, which are, of course, the managing partner or the CEO of their practice, C-suite, senior management, manager, and supervisors. We are delighted to have you with us today. And I'll keep us moving. And we wanted to see how this might be changing. We continue to ask this question to see and take a pulse on what resources and solutions we can help connect you to as our members. And so we're asking your top 3 professional challenges over the last 6 months. I don't know if I've ever seen other so high, although now it looks like it's dropping down to below. This is a fun new presentation mode where it kind of jumps around. A little dizzying, but it will probably slow down in a second, and we'll see what we end up with. Looks like we're starting to stabilize a bit. If you're joining a little bit late and you want to participate, there is that QR code in the bottom right-hand corner that you can use to participate. Wow, this is, I think, interesting. This might be the first time that we don't have some sort of human capital challenge as the number one. Now it is tied, I guess, with the impact of inflation and forecasts. Perhaps that's a time of the year struggle that's increasing those forecast concerns, or a sense of our demographics. Maybe we have more of our corporate accounting folks on here that maybe that affects a little bit more. Maintaining culture and managing hybrid workplace, finding talent, as soon as I say it. But it seems like those top four are fairly consistent. Retaining talent has dropped down, which is good to hear. I know that is a significant challenge for some, but perhaps maybe lightening a little bit. So while we have this slide up and we're talking about talent, I did want to remind you of our CPA Summit. We have that coming up on January 4th. So right at the beginning of the new year, we're going to start by talking about what has been over the last year the number one challenge that we're seeing in the profession, and that is the challenge of talent and human capital. Both recruiting to the profession broadly, as well as into your organizations, and then retaining and developing that talent, succession planning, things like that. On January 4th, we're going to have a little bit of context setting around some of the trends, and then we're going to really spend our time focused on solutions, ideas, creative solutions for you all as you tackle these challenges. There's also tremendous opportunity wherever there are challenges, and so we hope you'll join us for that free event on January 4th. Our next slide is just a thank you to our board of directors. We have a fantastic leadership at the MACPA. Just so grateful for this very diverse group of folks that really lead our profession very well. Grateful for them, and grateful for our foundation board of directors. Since we had our last meeting, I think some of these faces might be new. We had Pat Seitz with EY join our foundation board, as well as Melissa Tarkat with Aprio. So thank you to Pat and Melissa for investing in the future of our profession by participating in such critical leadership roles on our foundation board of directors. And thank you to our preferred providers. These are the folks that really partner with us in helping to keep our profession, our association, our members future ready. They are out there doing innovative, important research and new solutions for you all. And so we are grateful for their partnership. And I have the chance to now introduce one of those partners, Ashton Barksdale with CPA Charge is here with us this morning. And so Ashton, I'll turn it over to you for a second.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for letting me have this opportunity. I know it's a little early, so I appreciate it. But CPA Charge, we're so happy to be partnered with MACPA. It kind of says it on the slide, so I don't want to take too much of your time, but basically we provide tools so that you can easily accept credit, debit, e-check payments online or in the office. Wonderful time to sign up though. We are running a promo, so if you do sign up in the month of December, that program fee is waived for the first 12 months. So you get to try us for a year. There are never contracts, and so it's a wonderful opportunity. But I hope you'll have a wonderful day and a wonderful holiday season. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Ashton, for being here. And I just popped into the chat to everyone that website, learn more about the resources and the great offer from our partners at CPA Charge. We also have a new partner sponsor for today's town hall, and so I'd like to introduce Giles Pearson with Accountest. So Giles, take it away.
Thanks, Rebecca, and good morning, everyone. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Accountest. So we help firms avoid bad hires. So a bad hire being when you hire somebody who doesn't turn out as you expected. And we do that by using skills tests and personality tests that we develop so that you know the caliber of the candidate that you're taking on. And that avoids stress for the business owner, the financial cost, and the issues that you can have with team morale. With that, why am I even doing this? 25 years in public accounting is my background. I was 18 years as a partner with a large firm in New Zealand, as you can probably tell from my accent. We hired loads of people during that time. Some of those didn't work out. We went looking for some tests to test them on, and we just couldn't find anything that we thought was professional enough that we were prepared to put in front of a candidate. So when I finished doing that, I started the business and basically to be able to create something that firms can use so that you don't have to go through the struggle, I guess, that we went through looking for something. How do we help? You can see on the screen there the different levels of testing that we have across all parts of public accounting. In the corporate market, we have a similar list of tests. I didn't put those up as well, but we've got a similar matrix of tests for that as well. We also developed the world's only personality profile specific to accounting. Everything we do is online and instant. You can start the process and buy a test, get it completed, and have the results within 40 minutes. And with that, you get comprehensive reports with norm group comparisons and competency frameworks, depending on which report you're looking at. So, Rebecca, if you just jump onto the next slide. So jump on our site and have a look, accountest.com. Use the link for some special offers. Start a trial, have a look at our Hire Fast with Confidence ebook guide. And if you want to speak to me, Giles at accountest.com. So thanks, Rebecca, and enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you so much, Giles, for being here so early in the morning in California and heading back to New Zealand tomorrow, I think you said. So wonderful to have you. Our speakers today are our friends from Manus Canning. They are our lobbyists in Annapolis and have been a great partner with the MACPA for decades. I can't even be, I was not around. So, and I know it started with Nick's dad and now under Nick Manus. And so before we get into their topics, because it is very, very important, we wanted to show you two things, and I'm going to pop some links in the chat as well. But everything that we do in Annapolis, certainly Manus Canning is on top of and critical to our success, but also critical to our success is you all, our members and our grassroots. It's the relationships that we are able to build with, I believe, the 188, and they will correct me on that, representatives in Annapolis. So we do that through our PAC. CPA is our PAC. And so you have the QR code there. I will put the link in the chat as well. Year-end giving, maybe you think of that in a different way, but our PAC certainly needs your support. We, in comparison to the trial lawyers, which we often come up against in Annapolis, we are woefully underfunded. So I couldn't have these folks on without asking you to support us in that way. And then the other way that you can support us is just with your time and presence. January 18th, in 2024, it just sounds weird to say that. Annapolis, just a wonderful morning. If you've been to CPA Day before, you'll know how wonderful it is. If you haven't been to CPA Day before, please come experience just the amazing power of the grassroots efforts in Annapolis. I'll pop those in the chat, but first I will introduce Andrea Mansfield and Natasha Mayhew. Andrea is a government affairs professional at Manus Canning. She has more than 20 years of government relations management administration. She previously held roles at the Maryland Association of Counties, the Maryland Higher Education Committee, the Department of Budget and Management, and the DLLR, two agencies that are very near and dear to our profession, of course. And then Natasha, a government affairs specialist at Manus Canning. She held roles with the Maryland Department of Housing, Community and Development, the Maryland Association of Counties, and most recently was the director at the Mayor's Office for Government Relations. So I'm going to stop sharing and invite Natasha and Andrea.
Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And it's nice to be here this morning with all of you. I will say this is a little odd because we can't see you. And this is the first time I've presented in this type of environment. So please be patient if we screw up. I was going to make a comment about technical difficulties. However, then Giles was speaking. All of a sudden, he froze on my screen and a little box came up about internet instability. So I'm like, oh, maybe I jinxed myself, and I'm hoping it doesn't pop up in this next 45 minutes while we're on here. But anyway, it is good. It's really great to be here with all of you. And Natasha and I are really excited to be speaking with you this morning. I was slightly disappointed, though, and one of the questions early on about what you're looking forward to in the new year, no one said the legislative session. That's kind of what we live for here. But anyway, actually, this time of year is always like, oh, okay, it's just around the corner. Okay, what are we expecting? What are we going to be really focusing on? And as you would probably imagine, this is kind of a time too, you're trying to piece all those things together and what the important policy issues are going to be budget-wise, where they're going to be, how the House and Senate will work with the governor on resolving these things. So I think what we're hoping to lay out for you today is kind of looking at the overall the state's fiscal picture, kind of what we can expect budget-wise, kind of what's been going on during 2023 with the new administration, kind of getting their budget together. And then, kind of what we expect to see when we go into the General Assembly and what some of those big fiscal and tax issues might be. So with that, maybe Natasha, let me turn it over to you for a second, see if you want to add anything to that before we get into the meat.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It would have been nice to also see you guys, but I also think this platform is pretty cool to be able to have so many people and the opportunity to present to you from wherever you guys are around the state. As Andrea noted, this time for us is, quiet and busy at the same time. Everyone's getting ready for the holidays, and we're getting ready for the holidays as well, but also making sure that we are prepared for session. It's a very busy 90 days. So it's important to have that outlook and get that work done on the front end so that, you could hit the ground running in January and know what's ahead of you. So really hope you find this presentation helpful.
Thanks, Natasha. So as we started thinking about this and looking at the kind of state's fiscal picture, we kind of came up with the title, so to speak, Maryland's fiscal outlook, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm sure all of you read the paper, you see different things, you see comments the governor may be making, you see comments about leaders of the General Assembly that they're making, and kind of like giving a and really, I think coming from the administration, laying out fiscal constraints, concerns. We need to buckle down and work in partnership to get things done. But we really need to exercise constraint. But when we look at the budget, and actually when you look at where things are sitting revenue-wise and expenditures, which we'll get into a little bit, whereas you kind of sort of painting this picture that things are really, really going to be tough fiscally, in actuality for fiscal 25, the fiscal year that the budget is being prepared right now, things are not as bad in the near term, which means, closing and we'll get into what the gaps and things look like, but, closing the gap in the near term isn't that bad. And if you talk with some members of the General Assembly, they're like, okay, we can do this. So I guess that's the good. The good is the gap isn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. So I guess that kind of paints a little bit of a better picture than where we thought we were going to be. I mean, I think the bad is when you start looking at out your projections, their revenues and spendings are disaligned. And there will need to be some tough decisions and actions put in place now to kind of help deal with that in the longer term. So I guess that's more so the bad, because we are going to see, kind of reining things back a little bit, trying to figure out how to piece some things together, taking some actions to help prepare in that, which is going to mean that there may be some things in the budget, this upcoming budget, that aren't funded or aren't funded at the same levels that we saw before. I think the really big ugly is when we get into fiscal 28 and 29, and that's when we see some pretty significant shortfalls in the tune of like $2 to $2.5 billion that the governor, working with the General Assembly, will be looking at and trying to figure out how to maneuver that over the next couple of years to fill those gaps. So that's kind of really the ugly picture. Like in fiscal 2029, we're looking at roughly a $2.5 billion cash shortfall. So that's kind of like everything. That's like a quick nutshell, rolling it up into really a broad picture. But I think that we're going to try to get into some more details to kind of explain through all that, how that came together and how that came to be. So great, thank you, Natasha. You changed the slide, thank you. So I guess the big thing is, how did we get here? Generally speaking, coming through COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty. I feel a lot of federal dollars came into the state budget, which really helped. When we found out at that time, we actually had there was extra revenue that the General Assembly had at points in time. But generally speaking, in terms of the economy overall for Maryland, we haven't really rebounded as well as some other states have, which means our GDP is really not growing at level of other states. So we are seeing, a slowing of those revenues and a slowing of tax revenues. But because of the additional federal dollars, it was really able to keep things pretty stable, within the budget. So going back to March of 2023, when the General Assembly was finalizing the fiscal 24 budget, things really didn't look that bad. There was a little bit of out of line. They had to make some adjustments, but if you can see from the chart, where we were in March to where we ended up in September in terms of ongoing revenues, there's only slightly about a $14 million decline in revenues or in the estimates. But as we kind of went into we project out a little bit further, and as the Board of Revenue estimates, as they look at that, they pull it together. We actually are finding as we go into fiscal 2025, we're going to see actually a little bit of growth, about 2.1%, which really is not significant overall. I mean, it's higher than what was projected, but it's not where they were projecting it to be earlier on in the year. They were expecting to see more of a downturn. So that overall is kind of keeping things a little bit stable as we go into the fiscal 25 year. I think what's really throwing some things out of whack is on the expenditure side. Obviously, there's additional pressures. There's inflationary growth that's occurring within that. So that is putting the pressure on the budget. I guess the good thing is that the General Assembly did take several steps last session in working on the fiscal 24 budget with the additional revenues that they were finding. Instead of rolling those into programs where there would be ongoing expenditures, they actually funded a number of one-time initiatives. So maybe if you were a program or a nonprofit, you were looking for some funds to provide to grant recipients. They provided an additional influx of dollars only for one time, only for fiscal 24. So those items will be backed out of 25 to kind of help bring that spending and those revenues aligned a little bit more. But I think really one of the bigger drivers that we're looking at is really the blueprint, or the Kirwan Commission, as you may have heard of that. That really is putting kind of these out year pressures on the budget. But as I said, really for fiscal 25, what you can see here in this chart, Natasha just put it on the screen. You can kind of see what the total funds look like, what the cash balance is. They always monitor the structural balance within the budget So you can see for fiscal 25, we're looking at baseline numbers, there's a cash shortfall of about $413 million. And actually, in the grand scheme of things, that 413 million is, really is on par with, with where they've had to close gaps before. So in terms of 25, things are not looking that badly. As I said before, it's really kind of, moving forward and how to figure out and how to close these out-year gaps that are going to be the bigger concerns for the governor and the General Assembly, and beginning to lay that groundwork now. So let me see here. I think, so yeah, this next slide, what we wanted to show you, just kind of laying it out, for the out years. So you can kind of see the budgetary picture and see kind of what these, what the challenges are really going to be looking like. So as as we said previously, the ongoing revenues, they are forecasted to grow. But compared to spending, we're finding a problem here. So, for fiscal 25, as I said, there's the $413 million shortfall. That is increasing to $951 million. In fiscal 26, you can see 27, 28. Actually, if you got up to 29, and I think that little number at the bottom got cut off there, but it's a $2.2 billion shortfall for fiscal 28, but then 29, the number down there at the bottom was about $2.5 billion. And that's really what they're looking ahead. And as I said, Kerwin is one of the bigger drivers on that front. I think the General Assembly they were aware of when they passed the blueprint legislation that there was going to be more money in the budget that was going to go towards education, and they did try to plan ahead and put some money aside. Those dollars at that point will be used and allocated by that point in time. So really by fiscal 28, 29 is when we're seeing some of that taking place. So then our next slide, we wanted to kind of talk about some of the drivers. We mentioned education pretty significantly so far, because that's a huge driver. As you see from the general fund budget, really the education aid, 50% of the increase is attributed to education aid. So that's really driving some of this. Personnel is the other driver. I think if you have been reading in the paper about prior administration, or just, there have been a lot of vacancies within state agencies, whether, jobs were just not filled, whether there were contractual employees filling those positions. There really has been an emphasis on trying to replace those positions and build agencies back up so they, can do a better job in serving Marylanders in some respects. But when you add personnel, probably as all of you know, when you're in your businesses, when you add personnel, it's not just the salary cost, it's also health insurance, there's retirement, other costs that put pressures on the budget. So we're definitely seeing some personnel costs kind of playing a role here too in affecting that bottom line. Entitlements are always an area. Unfortunately, a large portion of our budget is mandated spending. It's Medicaid and other types of entitlement programs, SNAP benefits and things. The developmentally disabled population, provider rates and things like that. So needy populations that the state provides assistance to. And there's, obviously healthcare goes up, there's changes, so that puts inflationary pressures on those programs as well. So we're seeing an increase in entitlements. And we have some higher ed, DDA, the other categories, or other state agencies that have various types of programs that they administer would fall into that category. And I'm going to stop there. So Natasha, am I missing anything? Anything would add in that I haven't explained clearly?
Yeah, I think this was a really good look at what has been the drivers, what's happening here. But I guess what I think we should start laying out is, what is the Moore administration going to do to address this in FY 2025?
Yep. Yes. So that's a good question. There's been a lot of work going on. I think, sometimes it's kind of hard to picture, I think, and it was actually when I worked at the budget department. So I'm dating myself many years with that when it was a while ago. But when the administration, as you know, we have a new governor coming in. The governor has priorities and things that he wants to accomplish in his budget. But when the administration starts working on a budget, actually the session's just ending. They just kind of negotiated with the General Assembly to put that upcoming fiscal budget in place. So as an example, so for fiscal 24, they finalized those budget discussions in April of 23. That budget took effect July 1 of 2023 and will run through June 30th of 2024. At the same time, the budget department is kind of looking at revenue estimates, looking at expenditures. They're already putting budget targets in place for agencies to start working on the fiscal 25 budget. At the same time, they're also trying to close out the fiscal 23 budget, which ends that June 30 of 2023. So if we kind of dial it back a little bit to kind of set the stage. So back in May of 23, the budget department was kind of sizing up the fiscal condition of the state at that point. What are things going to look like? And they went out and they provided information to all the agencies saying, hey, we're going to expect you to, I believe the target was maybe we want you to look at your programs and cut them by 2%. Agencies, of course, have their own needs and things that they want to have funded. They always have, it's also what's called over the target requests. So if they have a policy initiative that costs money, it's not part of their base budget, they put those in as an over the target request. So all that, so the targets went out, they were putting all this information together over the summer. Beginning in September, once all the agencies submit their budgets to the Department of Budget and Management, that is when DBM starts doing their analysis of the budget and really kind of making their determinations as what they're going to fund, what they're not going to fund. All of this information gets rolled up. DBM is kind of matching it then with what the governor's priorities are. And trying to align the budget to achieve those priorities. But back over the summer, you really saw at that point, the governor was already in his comments to the Maryland Association of Counties. Not sure if some of you go to the Maryland Association of Counties conference. Obviously, Natasha and I both worked there for a while and served as our legislative director. It's a great organization. But we had the governor really talking about this was the time for discipline is now. The time for responsible and intentional governing is now. We have some of the best talent and assets in the world, but our economy is not reaching its full potential. Fiscal health is behind. He's talking about fiscal responsibility and really working in partnership at that point with others to kind of bring that fiscal responsibility while still achieving certain goals you want to achieve. So I guess if we kind of dial that forward a little bit, so where we're sitting right now is all of the budget requests have gone into the DBM. They've been scrutinizing them over the last couple of months. Now in mid-December, we're at the point where really the administration is now making its decisions on what it's going to fund in the budget. And with that, generally how this works is, DBM makes those recommendations go to the governor's office. Of course, there's also organizations like ours. I mean, as a lobbying firm, we love working with all of you. We also have several other clients that are also seeking funding in the budget. So there's all these pressures that they're going through right now, trying to figure out how to meet the inflationary factors, how to keep Kerwin funded. And then also when you have all these other types of programs that were funded and the pressures of those organizations kind of fighting for the funding. They're now in the process of making these tough decisions of what all that is going to look like. And they should be finalizing those decisions fairly soon. And ultimately that will be introduced. January 17th is the day the budget will be introduced before the General Assembly.
So we know the General Assembly isn't just sitting back while all of this is happening. So what sort of things are they working on while the governor's working on his budget?
Yeah. So that's what makes this process really interesting, because where you have the administration with priorities, I know, I love these graphics, Natasha. That was great. It's awesome. But where you have the governor and identifying his priorities, you have a general assembly that's also looking at theirs. But to really help them in this budgetary process, there is something that's called the Spending Affordability Committee. And that committee was put in place to kind of help really to make recommendations for spending increases in the budget. So over the summer months and in the fall, I mean, they have a team, the Department of Legislative Services, that's really looking at the same information. They're looking at revenue estimates, and not just from the state. They look at Moody's and some of the more national revenue estimating organizations out there. They're looking at expenditures. They're looking to see, okay, well, if we apply inflationary factors for salaries, for caseloads and things, what is that base budget going to look like? And they're needing to make recommendations for spending levels. Now, the Spending Affordability Committee is made up of pretty much it's leadership of the General Assembly, both the majority and the minority party, and a public member to weigh in. So that group, they meet. They used to meet 3 times years ago. I guess they decided they would consolidate. Now they only meet twice. So the Spending Affordability Committee, they had their first meeting in November. And that first meeting is for them is really to kind of set a baseline to help members understand, what revenues are looking like, what expenditures are looking like, what the pressures are, to kind of help more frame for them what tough budgetary decisions they're going to need to make during the session. So in that meeting, they looked at that, and it was really interesting because they also, as the Legislative Services, they also kind of guide the budget committees in raising certain policy issues, and obviously, as you can see on the screen right now, they also help offering suggestions for balancing the budget or addressing structural shortfalls in the budget. And these discussions at this time and recommendations really kind of frame where the General Assembly's perspective and the budget committee's work going forward. But as you can see here, knowing that there's this, disalignment between revenue and expenditures in the out year, one option they put out was just reduce ongoing spending to more closely align with ongoing revenues. Well, obviously, it does resolve the problem, but, it's going to, well, you saw what the shortfall is going to be like at, $2.5 billion. It's a pretty significant reduction in ongoing spending. So, it says, given the magnitude of out-year challenges, starting to reduce ongoing spending in fiscal 25 is essential to avoid the fiscal cliff. And that's pretty much, they're going to have to do that to some degree anyway. But to think that they could cover, that's a big hole, big gap to close if you're just going to cut the budget that way. Or they could enhance on revenues to support spending commitments. Yeah, that also helps resolve the problem, but the second bullet is actually kind of a little jolting in some ways, because it says, revenues alone are unlikely to resolve the long-term budget problem. For illustrative purposes, closing the fiscal 29 budget gap entirely with revenues is equivalent to increasing the sales tax by 30%, or the individual income tax revenues by 12%, which is, that's significant. And probably something they're not going to do. I don't think that's maybe really consider look at. One thing, and I kind of mentioned this briefly, probably didn't explain it too well at all, but it's shifting PAYCO to bonds. When we have additional revenue over the past couple of years, I mentioned funding already one-time expenditures. They also took some of that money and they said, well, we'll fund capital projects with these dollars. And of course, at that point, interest rates were still low. They were doing, but basically they have put, and I'm sorry, I just got this little unstable connection again. Hopefully I didn't freeze or anything, but But what they could do, so instead of using general fund revenues to help fund capital projects, those projects that they did fund that way, now they can roll those projects back into the capital budget. So it's freeing up the general fund dollars that are going towards paying for those projects over the next couple of years. And I think we will very likely see some of that happening in the budget. The next bullet here mentions the Capital Debt Affordability Committee. That's another committee that meets. It has the treasurer, the comptroller, the secretary of DBM sits on there, and they look at what the capital debt ratios look like for the state, what the outstanding bonds are versus tax revenues coming in to cover those costs, and they make a recommendation for the debt limits. So they did increase that debt limit this year for fiscal 25. So that does provide some additional room there to roll some of those general funded capital projects into the capital budget to kind of ease and release some of that pressure on the general fund. And then they can also draw on the rainy day account that we have in the state. And actually, that's another area where the General Assembly has really taken steps over the past couple of years to increase funding in that rainy day fund. I mean, that is a temporary solution. It doesn't really address the structural challenges they're dealing with going out to fiscal 29, but in the short term, it does help close that gap to relieve pressures for the current fiscal year that they're working on, and relieve some of the reductions they may need to make otherwise. However, when you do that, when you take the money out of the rainy day fund, if we do have a recession, and I know things are not looking as bad on that front right now, but when you only spend that money once, and if you don't have the money to replace it, then you're kind of leaving yourself more vulnerable in the out years to cover costs.
All right. Well,
So
thanks,
what does that
Andrea.
mean? All right. Yeah. So I guess, Natasha, I guess that's now you. Go for it.
Yeah, so Andrea did a great job, really explaining how we got here, all the revenue growth, the fiscal pressures, the drivers of the general fund. So now I'm gonna, give a look at the session to come, and really that's the sessions to come. So just going back to sort of reinforce some of what Andrea had said. So, education funding is one of the major drivers of the state's spending. And it will be the major driver for the deficits in those future years to 2028, 2029. So under the blueprint for education, the state and counties were given new education funding mandates and metrics. And since 2021, they created a Blueprint Trust Fund, which is funded through gaming revenues, sport betting revenues, certain sales tax revenues, and some one-time revenues to pay for the blueprints. But despite those revenues, as you can see, the Blueprint Trust Fund only has enough money to cover through basically 2027 of it. While we're talking about the states, it's also important to note that the counties are also facing steep increases on their end for education spending, so are similarly stretched for cash to meet their future benchmarks. So as Andrea stated, in the immediate years, 2024, 2025, 2026, not so much a huge problem, but it's a problem that needs to be solved in the long term. And so if the state is going to stave off those major fiscal hits, those gears are turning now for what they can do or start building to do to cut that deficit. And so everyone knows something needs to be done. There are a lot of thoughts on what could be done, but no consensus on what to do. Little has also been shared about the governor's budget. So everyone's kind of going into session, again, knowing they need to do something, but it's not quite clear what path they want to take. So we may see them pursue some options in the 2024 session. We may see them pursue some options in 2025. And so at the Mako conference, you had a number of General Assembly and administration leadership, Eric Lukey, the Chief Legislative Officer, Senate President Pro Tem Malcolm Augustine, and Majority Leader David Moon. And so they were on a panel giving an outlook for the General Assembly session. And in particular, Majority Leader David Moon did raise the possibility of tax increases. On the other side, Eric Lutke, the governor's chief legislative officer, was a lot more hesitant in his remarks, and basically echoed a lot of what the governor had said during the Mako Summer Conference, where there's going to have to be difficult decisions made. They're taking those decisions very seriously. He doesn't think they're going to be as big of a scale as the cost shifts that happened during the Great Recession, a decade or so ago. But is conscious of what those impacts can be on the state and local governments for all these projects that need to be funded. The Senate Majority Leader, Malcolm Augustine, he also took a very measured approach on his outlook for the session, noting that they're going to need to take a look at the governor's budget to see where the gaps are, but also align them for what their priorities are going to be going into the session. So, hesitating and saying that it's premature to talk specifically about taxes at this time, because they don't exactly know what they're going to be able to do in the immediate time to address these issues. But despite there not being clear consensus on what needs to be done, again, I think even while they're being hesitant on this, the deficit is so large that they're going to have to combine a number of these measures. There's really no way when you're talking towards 2028 and 2029 that you can bring up those revenues just on revenues or just on cuts or just on cost shifts. It'll take a lot of work to close that gap. And so while we don't know specifically what they're going to do, I think there is some signs of what could be in store ahead. And you see that when it comes to transportation funding. So I think this could be a good case study for potential, cuts and tax increases. So the Department of Transportation, their consolidated transportation plan essentially lists all the capital projects that are funded through this fiscal year and then planned over the next 5 years. Like the Education Trust Fund, there is a transportation trust fund, which includes revenues from the state's gas tax, the new vehicle tax, and biannual vehicle registration fees. So when it comes to transportation, those taxes and revenues can no longer sustain their funding needs. And you'll see some of this is like environmental changes in that there's more fuel efficient vehicles, and electric vehicles also mean less gas tax, with cars lasting longer or people, keeping their cars longer. That means less money collected on new vehicle taxes. And additionally, you have just rising construction costs. So for the capital projects, each project costs more than what was previously estimated, and that just escalates very quickly. As anyone knows, even if they're doing home renovations, how quickly those costs go up. So the CTP is short on funds. It's $100 million in 2025, $2.1 billion by the time you get to the future years. So this is the first year that the agency came in, or actually in 23 session, with this, with the CTP being unbalanced. And so with that deficit being so dire, the administration has already proposed some major cuts and potential fee increases. So to close that shortfall in transportation, they will cut roughly $1 billion from the operating budget and another $2 billion from their capital budget. And this spikes a lot of fears from local governments that the state will also cut some of their, shift some of those burdens onto the local governments in the future years. So in addition to budget cuts and hiring freezes, they're also looking at fee and parking rate increases. They're deferring hundreds of $millions in projects across the state. And looking to increase tolls and to institute an electric hybrid vehicle tax. So lots of cuts across the department, and lots of ways that the department is looking to close their gap. And again, this is just on the transportation side of things. So you can imagine when you're talking about the state's larger budget, you have transportation, education, and then you have all these other drivers that there's a lot the state needs to look at. Some of the other issues that they have coming in is that there's a lack of funding for state trauma centers. So that's another area where they're going to be looking to boost that funding. Trauma centers are very necessary for the state. And you can imagine there are lots of necessary services. So to go to, cutting programs or funding them not to the level they were previously funded, these are all things that are highly on everyone's minds because you might see some drastic cuts such as they're making for transportation in order to close that budget gap for those out years. So some other issues on the radar that I just like to flag, generally speaking, and again, because we don't have a lot of specifics yet on what exactly they're going to do in the 2024 session when it comes to the broader issues of closing the future deficits, and getting the budget in line, doing those tough decisions that they say they have to make. But I wanted to just flag a couple of other things that would be of interest to this group. So DLS, last session, there was a bill passed to review some of the taxes. So this was the Tax Expenditure Evaluation Act. So two of the taxes they reviewed was an Innovation Investment Incentive Tax Credit, as well as a Purchase Cybersecurity Tax Credit, which is also known as the Buy Maryland Cybersecurity Tax Credit Program. Those are two programs they found just weren't really meeting the needs and they were underutilized. And so the DLS recommendation here is to halt these tax credits and perhaps look at other ways to have some incentives when it comes to these two particular areas of interest. Another issue that comes up, and I'm sure you guys are very familiar with this, is combined reporting. That's introduced at this point, year after year. We're not seeing, we anticipate it will be introduced and that it needs to be kept on the radar. Fortunately, in the past couple of years, it hasn't moved. We're certainly hoping that continues to be the case. But I guess that would be a good plug to continue your advocacy efforts and making sure, that everyone stays on top of that issue. So iGaming is another interesting area. This one's pretty new. The state hasn't really entered this field yet, but it is something that they're considering. So iGaming, it refers to traditional casino games that are played electronically over the internet. So it's different from online sports betting, but in the sense that you're betting online, very similar. So legalized iGaming, you could think of like online poker. They're available in a number of states. Legislation has been introduced in several states, including Maryland, to legalize it. It could be a potential revenue stream, much as the casinos and sports betting are revenue streams. In that case, that go to education funding. So that's something, that they could look at in terms of generating some more revenue. Another area, so these data centers. So data centers you could think of as enormous warehouses that really house all critical infrastructure for online data servers. So they contain computing infrastructure, IT systems, that holds a lot of digital files. So for instance, Amazon will have a digital, data center to hold their stuff. So data centers are interesting because since they are so big, they provide a way for local jurisdictions to revitalize and abandon industrial sites, and then generate some revenue from having these data centers, their employees, on properties in the state. The governor has stated that he wants the state to be a major hub for data centers. It's one of his top priorities, and anticipated to be in the legislative packet for his upcoming session. But data centers are not without controversy. They consume a lot of energy. So some worry there could be a lot of climate and environmental issues. So you kind of have a thing where they're balancing bringing these huge airport hangar size data centers into the state, and then having your environmental advocates and others, more hesitant on, well, what is this going to do in the long term for the environment? And so that was just like a brief preview of some other issues that are on the radar going into session. But otherwise, that wraps up our presentation. So we really welcome any questions you may have, interested in any thoughts you may have going into the session, and included our contact info so that if you have thoughts that come to mind later, you could always reach out to us as well.
Thank you so much, Andrea and Natasha. We did have some questions come in, so I'm gonna go to the one that was the top voted of the questions that came in, and that is, how will Maryland be impacted if there's a federal government shutdown?
Oh, yeah. So Maryland does
drastically.
have a lot of federal workers. So
Right.
we are very much impacted when things are not going well on the federal level. Certainly you'll have people that are out of the jobs that are having difficulty paying their rents, less money to spend on everything, which then means less tax revenue to the state. So more so than some other states that aren't as closely located to the federal government, we are very much impacted by government shutdowns.
The next one was about the purple line in Montgomery County. Is the purple line over budget, and will it continue on schedule? I don't know if you know anything about what's going on there.
I'm not, I mean, I know, I think the over budget, I think that answer would be yes. I know there's been a lot of controversy back and forth, the purple line and lawsuits, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure, Natasha, if you
Whether
know
we'll continue.
something.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we can follow up.
Yeah,
No,
we
yeah.
can follow up with that. And then since 50% of expense increases over the next 5 years is driven by education, of course, what, if anything, is being done to moderate those expense increases? And you might not know the answer to this question, but that might be something we see in the session, or.
Well,
Go ahead, Natasha. I'll follow up.
so I was going to say, when it comes to education, this seems to be much of the, what is it, like the third rail issue, in that generally speaking, no one wants to cut education.
Right.
Politically, it's a hard issue. So I think even when the blueprint was being debated as they were putting it forward, you certainly got a lot of pushback, particularly from Republican jurisdictions, about the cost that it would put, and on the local jurisdictions, as well as the state, and sort of a what you're seeing now with the deficit was really the concern on the front end that this is going to be a lot of spending. How are we going to pay for it? I don't know that there's anything in the works to moderate education spending. I think more likely you're going to see looks at other places to cut spending or make some changes in order to afford the blueprint, since that was such a major push for the legislature to get through. They're not going to look to cut the education spending.
Yeah, that's certainly not a way to get reelected. So
yes, exactly.
I thank you so much. We did have a couple more questions that maybe we can get some answers from you to follow up in an email with our members. Andrea, Natasha, thank you so very much for being here. I did see, I want to quickly, give another plug for the PAC and for CPA Day. I saw a future town hall topic idea I wanted to address quickly for folks because it was voted up. Info on BOI, the beneficial ownership information reporting. I did want to let you know that actually Friday last week, we signed on to a letter to delay that. There are two bills, HR 4035, this is on the federal side, and then Senate 2623. We signed on to a letter to propose that any end of year legislation package would include one of those to try and give the profession implementation time for that right now that rule goes into effect on January 1st. AICPA has a landing page that I'm going to post in the chat for those of you that are interested. We did successfully get the 30 days that were for new organizations created in 2024 extended to 90 days period to be able to file those, but wanted to let you know that we did sign on that letter. We're hopeful, but if you are a practitioner considering doing that work, please, please, please be careful and talk to your insurance group about recommendations for that. We also went through our State Board of Accountancy to request an opinion from the Attorney General in Maryland. So that's a long process, so we probably won't have an answer for that in time for any kind of implementation unless we get that delay, but just wanted to let everyone know that we were on top of that. With that, I wish you all a wonderful, happy holiday season, and I look forward to seeing you virtually on January 4th for our summit, and then in person January 18th at CPA Day. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful holiday season.